Robin Hood Radio and the Robin Hood Radio Network is proud to present Leonard Lopate at Large, lively hour-long in-depth discussions providing overviews and context to topics usually covered in partial measures. His guests include leading thinkers, scientists, artists, economists, farmers, historians, authors, and politicians. Mr. Lopate is a Peabody Award winner whose numerous honors include 3 Associated Press Awards and 3 James Beard Awards.
Welcome to Leonard Lopate at Large. I'm Leonard Lopate. Palo's Fine Foods is a specialty Italian food shop in Little Italy that turns out to be more than just a store. It's a family-owned importer of edible Italian secrets, many of which are so secret you can't find them anywhere else in the United States. The business has been run by the Palo family for over 100 years, and today's guest, Luigi Palo, has been working there for over 40 of them. He joins us now to talk about why, although Italian cuisine is a particular American favorite, we have had such a limited access to many of the treasures you can find in Italy. Hi, Lou. Welcome to our show.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Leonard, for having me here today.
You run the store with your brother Sal and your sister Marie, but you've written that you're just caretakers. What do you mean?
That's right. Well, we always look to the fact that our place has been started first by my great-grandfather, Savino Di Palo, in 1910. And then an additional shop opened up in 1925 by my grandmother Concetta and my grandfather Luigi. And we feel that their spirit is the ones that are the owners of Di Palo's.
Isn't that rare to have a shop or, well, a business anyway, that has so many different generations involved, aren't you? Isn't your son involved and some of the other kids?
Yes, actually, we're now into our 5th generation.
Wow.
We're very proud of that fact. That our children, my sister's children, my children, have come into the business, have felt the passion and the idea to continue the traditions of the Italian immigrants as well as to represent the food culture of Italy today.
When did the Di Palos begin to go to Italy to bring back things that were unavailable here?
Well, over 45 years ago, I personally started to make a lot of trips frequently to Italy to not only see the producers that we were doing business with, but to learn more about the food culture that Italy had. And it's been such an exciting experience for me to go and learn, to see my own heritage going back. You know, of course, I'm an American with Italian heritage, but I reclaimed my Italian ancestry through food. And it's been such an exciting experience for 45 years going back and forth to Italy.
And to speak to the people who actually make the food, find out how they do it.
I learned that you need to break bread with somebody to really get the feel and to get their understanding and their passion. And once you do that, sitting down, speaking with them, having a meal with them, then you can absorb that passion. And then my job is to give that and transcend that passion to the American consumer.
So you have brought back cheeses, cured meats, olives, olive oils, vinegars. How limited was the supply before you started going? There were other people who were also selling to Italian immigrants at that time.
Of course. I mean, you know, the mass migration of Italian immigrants was between 1880 and 1920. They were mostly simple people, farmers, peasant farmers, came here for opportunity to make a better life for themselves and for future generations. But when they came to America, you know, of course, they needed to bring with them some of their own traditions and customs, and especially through food. My great-grandfather, Savino Di Palo, was a farmer. He was a dairy farmer, made a little bit of his fresh cheeses when he was in the region of Basilicata, where he came from. And he brought that tradition back with him here into New York City.
But he wasn't making cheese here.
He was making fresh mozzarella cheese and some fresh ricotta and casciota, simple cheeses that was made. He was getting fresh milk delivered locally, turning it into these fresh cheeses. And over the years, however, when my grandmother and grandfather continued, they started to increase the product line to include some of the Italian cheeses that were available, such as aged provolone, pecorino romano. These were cheeses that were able to stand sea voyages. Remember, they didn't have refrigeration back in the 20s, and so.
And they were being brought in by food importers.
Yes, there was a people. My grandparents, they used to purchase it from people that were actually the ones that imported it. Over the years, however, the product line at Palos has increased. With my father and my uncle Michael, they increased it to include salumi. Salumi is any kind of cured or cooked meats, prosciutto, salami. And as we took over the business, my sister Marie and Sal, myself, we continued the product line to include really fine olive oil, fine pastas from the different regions of Italy. It's very diverse. Each region, Italy is like 20 countries in one, with the food culture in each one being very different. So we started to learn and discover about the different types of products that made it different from one region to another, and started to increase that product line.
And about the pastas, are there specific flours that you can only find in Italy, or can't you make spaghetti, for example, or ravioli or whatever, using an American all-purpose flour?
Well, it's strange that you say that. Italy does import a lot of wheat and use a lot of the American and Canadian flour to make pasta. But in the case of a lot of artisanal pasta, the wheat needs to be grown, whether it's in Trentino or in Sardinia or in Puglia, and this pasta definitely has a slight different flavor, and this is what we try to bring to the table.
This is the French concept of terroir. Each region has a different kind of soil, and so you want a different taste. Can you actually taste the difference?
I certainly can, because I tune myself to taste the difference, and I look for that difference. And we don't use the word terroir, we use terrano, which is the Italian version of that. And Italy is unique in this respect. It's it's a peninsula. It's got many different climates, many different soil compositions, and makes for a very different diversity of foods.
And because of its history, many different cuisines. Is it possible, because of all those distinct regions, to even talk about just one Italian cuisine?
Well, what is Italian food? Okay, Italian food is there's many different interpretations of what Italian food is, but I always say, when people are saying, I'm going to Italy, I said, oh, really? Where are you going to Italy? Okay, I'm going to Sicily. Okay, you're going to Sicily. Well, remember, in Sicily, you want to eat the typical cuisine, drink the typical wines of the typical grapes from that particular area.
Well, until Italian unification, the Risorgimento consolidated the various regions into a single kingdom of Italy in the 19th century. There have been 8 states on the Italian peninsula, each with distinct laws and traditions, and also a number of them had been under the control of Spain, and others under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So isn't that reflected in the food?
Absolutely, it's reflected in the food. You as you go further north, in the region of Trentino Alto Adige, you're going to see a lot of Austrian, Germanic type of foods. I always refer to that particular area as the fusion area of Italy. And what do I mean by that is because you have unique culture of Austria and the unique culture of southern Mediterranean, northern Germanic, southern Mediterranean fused together in that one particular area.
Is that why in the South and in Sicily, tomato sauces are common, but then you don't find them in the North? Because in the South, that Spain controlled much of that area, and Spain was bringing tomatoes in from the Americas as part of the Columbian Exchange. They also brought in chocolate, and there are chocolate sauces in Sicily that are not for dessert.
Absolutely correct. In Sicily, we have one town, it's called Modica, and in that town they produce chocolate, a specific chocolate that you only find in that town or in Mexico. And what it is, it's chocolate with raw sugar in it. And of course, yes, it was a lot of control was with Spain. In fact, it was the Regno de Due Sicilie, the kingdom of the two Sicilies, which was comprised of Naples all the way down to Sicily, that brought a lot of these products. And today, our San Marzano tomatoes, that's along the volcanic soil of Vesuvius, was where they planted those tomatoes that made tomato red rather than yellow, because the original tomato was really yellow. So it came back red, and it became a love affair with Southern Italians to use the tomato, in not only in sauces but in other types of dishes as well.
And San Marzanos have a distinct flavor. There's some dishes, if you really want to make them right, you can't make them with anything but San Marzanos.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we only get them in cans, but that's okay.
Well, for sure. I mean, a canned tomato, if it's canned properly at the proper time of harvest, is sometimes better in using for cooking purposes than fresh tomato, because of the fact that the fresh tomato tends to have so much water, and you lose some of that flavor when you're cooking.
So
in the water evaporation.
In the north, you're more likely to find sauces made with butter, and you're more likely to find rice than pasta.
Rice is very, very popular in the areas of Piemonte, Lombardy, and the Veneto, in the northern areas. Nobody really knows when rice first appeared in Italy, but I will tell you this. Rice, because it generates itself.
Marco Polo?
Well, I don't know if it was Marco Polo, but it's one of the things that they credit for bringing the population back out of after the Black Plague, because it was something that grew very quickly, and it was able to give them a lot of nourishment and helped Europe survive through the era of the Black Plague.
And then Lydia Bostanich has pointed out that there's also a distinct Italian-American cuisine that was developed over the years, I guess based mostly on southern Italian dishes. But did it develop out of the need to make do with what was available here?
That's right. Spaghetti and meatballs. In Italy, there's no dish, spaghetti and meatballs. There's polpetta, which is a meatball, and it's usually served separate from a dish in spaghetti. And there's been a lot of theories of why spaghetti and meatballs came about. And I asked my grandmother one time, why you made spaghetti and meatballs when you were growing up in Italy? She said, no. She said, why? Well, her feeling was that when my grandmother, this is my mother's mother now, she came over, she had 4 children. She needed to give them some type of protein, some type of meat. And she would save that abundance of meat on Sunday, where she made a ragu. And what is a ragu? What's the difference between a ragu and a sauce? A ragu has rendered meat in it. It's a gravy. Now, we grew up saying gravy, but it was really ragu, the Italian way to say it. And it had rendered meat in it. And what she would do is she would go to the butcher and she would buy neck bones and ribs and the hardest, driest piece of meat she would pound down and roll it with some herbs, spices, and some cheese we called braciola. And she would take chopped meat, mix it with cheese and, in our case, fresh ricotta, mix it all up, and then take all that and cook it in this ragu. And this became the Sunday gravy that was served with a big portion of pasta. You see, in Italy, the pasta portions are smaller. In America, why are they bigger? Why the Italian home has big plates of pasta? Because pasta was the filler and cheap, and the meat was the side, so to speak.
But there was more meat available here as well. Meat was cheaper, I imagine. That's why you have so much ground beef in Italian-American food.
Well, because the cheaper parts of meat were originally ground up, and that's what they could have. The average Italian immigrant who was fairly poor could afford to buy.
My guest is Lou DiPalo of, what is the official name of the store? DiPalo's Fine Foods?
Today it's DiPalo Fine Foods, and the original name was C. DiPalo, Concetta DiPalo, which is going to be put on our sign on our new additional place that we're opening next door.
Well, you started, when I first started going to DiPalo's, you were in a different store than you are now. You were across the street in a much smaller location. Was that the original store?
The original store,
Mod and Grand?
The original store of my great-grandfather, Savino DiPalo, was in 131 Mott Street. And has anybody, if you've seen the movie The Godfather, there was a scene where...
Everybody's seen The Godfather.
I know. That's why I said it. There was a scene where Marlon Brando was buying oranges from a vendor. And behind him was the store, 131 Mott Street. He bought the oranges, and then he turned around, ran across the street, and got shot in that particular scene. That was my great-grandfather's store back in 1910. In 1925, on the northeast corner of Mott and Grand Street, my grandparents had this 400-square-foot store.
Teeny.
Very tiny.
But always crowded.
Well, it didn't take much to crowd up the store, But over the years, the store was pretty tired. We are a food market. We needed to bring it to a better level. So we had an opportunity to move on the northwest corner. So just across the street, a mirror image of ourselves. We were able to renovate the store in the proper way and not lose a day of business. And one day we just moved across the street.
And you make stuff there.
We make our fresh mozzarella on a daily basis, and it's something that we consider to be our signature product.
Now, mozzarella has to be eaten fresh. Is that why it's not something that you'd want to import? And then another question along those lines. A lot of the mozzarella that I've seen in Italy was from buffalo milk, and it was absolutely delicious. But is it possible to import buffalo milk?
Yes, we do bring it in every week. We once a week it comes in. It's very good. It's a little bit more on the commercial level to maintain its ability to be brought over. It's flown in from Italy.
It's full of butterfat, isn't it? Is
yeah,
that what makes it so
buffalo,
rich?
Buffalo milk has a little bit more butterfat than cow's milk. However, understand something. The true mozzarella is made out of the milk of the water buffalo. In essence, what we make, and anyone who makes mozzarella from cow's milk, the cheese is called fior di latte. And what is the difference? Of course, different animal, different characteristics in the milk, and you're going to have slightly different flavor. Buffalo milk is a little more gamier, slightly more pungent, very, very spongy. Fior di latte, on the other hand, it tends to be a little bit sweeter, and that needs to be made and consumed the same day, within hours of when it's made. Because what happens is, especially if you make it by hand like we do, and we don't pump it with water afterwards, it's full of milk fat. And any fat you put into the refrigerator, what happens? It goes back into solid. So fresh mozzarella means fresh. You want to eat it and enjoy that milky, creamy, sweet taste that fior di latte offers.
Some of the best gelato I ever had in my life was from buffalo milk, water buffalo milk as well. And that's something I imagine you can't import.
Gelato is a little bit more difficult to bring in, and we don't really have a supply of water buffalo adequate enough to make a big supply of gelato.
For a while, we were going to Venezuela for that milk, but politics have changed.
Yes, certainly, and the milk is very, buffalo milk in Venezuela is very different than the buffalo milk in Campania.
Now, Martin Scorsese wrote the foreword to your book, the Guide to the Essential Foods of Italy. I remember his mother used to shop at the Palos.
Yes, Katie Scorsese and her husband Charles used to shop on a weekly basis. If they weren't on a film shoot, they would always be. Charlie would always come down to go to the local barber every week, and Katie would come in and talk to my mother, and she would buy a few things. And sometimes she didn't buy anything, just came in to say hello. And I feel that it was a big honor that Martin Scorsese wrote my foreword, and I feel that the Palos is one of his connections to his upbringing over the years, and I think he has a dear spot in his heart for our place.
But you've appealed to a wide range of cooks, not all of them Italian. Ruth Reichel has said, I'm quoting, "Of all the stores in all the world, De Palo's is probably my favorite." And Daniel Boulou, the famous French chef, has called your store one of the 7 wonders of the world.
I think it has to do with the fact that the passion that we have to share the type of Italian food and the knowledge behind it strikes people like Ruth and Danielle as something that's a treasure that New York has to offer, and that we consider ourselves one of the treasures of New York City in Italian food.
Do French and Italian cuisines share many ingredients? Would Danielle come down to get certain things that would work in his food?
I know Daniel has come down and he has purchased Parmigiano to bring to his father in Lyon. He says, when I go to Lyon, we have plenty of wonderful cheese in France, but he came down with Jeffrey Steingarten one day and said, I have to bring a piece of Parmigiano to my father, a good piece. He says, I don't get it in France like this.
Jeffrey Steingarten, who used to write about food in Vogue.
In Vogue, yes, Vogue.
In your guide to the essential foods of Italy, you tell lots of stories, and one I found particularly fascinating involved the role that French monks played in making cheeses in northeastern Italy.
Yes, in fact, that was the cheese.
In the 12th century, or even earlier.
Yeah, in the 10th century. These monks, these Cistercian monks, which came down from that area, literally changed the name for cheese in what we know as Italy today. And what do I mean by that? Well, the word for cheese in the Italian language originally was from the Roman word cassius, and it was cascio, C-A-C-I-O. These monks came down and they reclaimed land, the land of in the Po River area. The Po River is a river that runs across northern Italy, that actually divides Italy. And in the 4th century, the barbarians came and plundered and chased all the farmers in this very rich, fertile land up into the mountains. And for 600 years, this land was laid waste.
Attila the Hun actually destroyed the second largest city in Italy, Aquileia. He sacked it and destroyed
it. And so they all went up to the mountains, those people. The land was, and this river would flood every year. And these monks came down, reclaimed the land. They used the cow as a beast of burden to plow the land. What are you going to do? Cow gives milk twice a day. So they started to make this cheese that stood the test of time. The cheese we know as grana padano means grana, a cheese that's made from bits of curd that are the size of a rice grain. Padano because it's of the Po. And they put it into a form, and they called the cheese formaggio. And that's the word we use for Italian cheese today, formaggio. So
it sounds to me like the history of Europe is partly the history of food.
Food is very important to Europeans, especially to the Italians and the French. I mean, in America, I often say that Americans, we eat to live. Italians, French, they live to eat.
Now, Grana Padano is, because of this history, is probably the most storied. It's been made for over 1,000 years?
Over 1,000 years, that's right.
But many people see it as almost interchangeable with Parmesan, which is from a very different part of Italy.
Well, the Parmigiano Reggiano and Grana Padano, I call them first cousins. There is a slight difference between the two, and the main difference is the fact of, as we mentioned before, the terrano or the terroir. Grana Padano is produced above the Po River, and below the Po River, we produce Parmigiano Reggiano. And certainly, there's a much wider spread area where they produce Grana Padano, so you have some diversity from Piemonte to Lombardia, a little bit of Emilia-Romagna, Veneto and Trentino produce this cheese, whereas Parmigiano Reggiano is primarily produced only in the region of Emilia-Romagna, which some people often call the gastronomic part of Italy, gastronomic capital of Italy. And it has such wonderful products there that Americans love today, such as your prosciutto di Parma, your Parmigiano Reggiano, as we mentioned. And now in America, we're excited to say that since this past September, we were able to get something very special. It's called Culatello di Zibello. Zibello, a suburb of Parma, which borders that Po River, just below the Po River, produces this cured meat that is most unique that you'll find because of this unique microclimate that you get from that particular Po River. And the culatello is basically only half part of the hind leg of the pig, whereas the prosciutto is the entire part, cured in a pig's bladder for several years in a unique environment, which creates this microflora, attaches itself to the bladder, now we call casing, and imparts a unique flavor. This very earthy, intense flavor that makes culatello a prized meat. And even the Prince of England, Prince Charles, has his culatello being cured in cellars in this area of Zibello.
You have to wonder how they even came up with the idea of making it that way.
I think trial and error.
Putting it in a pig's bladder. Somebody had to say, "Hey, how about putting it in a pig bladder?"
The intestines was often used as casings. So why not stuff a piece of the hind leg in a bladder in a casing? But you need casings were intestines. You never had one big enough to put half a leg of so I guess they figured, let's try the bladder, and they did.
The Grana Padano was made to withstand the harsh temperature changes on long sea voyages. So was that an early source of trade?
Absolutely. Did
monks, people around the world start, in neighboring countries anyway, start recognizing that Italy was making some pretty great formaggios?
I think it got discovered by sea voyages. Now, understand, the monks had monasteries. In the 10th century or so, a monastery was like an inn. A traveler would travel by horse or by foot, usually on average of about 25 miles in one day. And if you go throughout Europe, especially in Italy, you'll see every 25 miles there's a monastery. And you would travel from one monastery to another. And then when you were in the monastery, not only you would pay for your room and board, but whatever they produced, whether it was a liqueur or a cheese or a preserved vegetable, you would buy some and take it with you to continue your voyage, your trip. Grana Padano was a cheese meant to last the test of time. And the monks, through, I guess, trial and error, realized if you could extrude much of the moisture out of the cheese, because cheese is nothing but milk in the solid form. And milk is comprised of three parts: fat, protein, and water, and carbohydrates. But fat and protein, you need to separate from the water. How do you do that? They understood that by adding certain enzymes, you were able to separate it. And if you could extrude as much water as possible, the cheese would be able to be aged and stored for a longer period of time, because water is a conductor of bacteria. And if you were able to get some of it out of there, a lot of it out. So they realized by cutting the curds, when you're making cheese, you got the whey, curds and whey. The whey is the water, the curds is the fat and protein. If you break it down into very small pieces, the size of a rice grain, and then pack it together in a form, you were able to keep the cheese for a long period of time, for years, without, with, of course, a moderate temperature change.
Now, the cheeses we're talking about now all come from south of the Dolomite Mountains. And you said the water came from the Po River. Do we taste that Po River water? Obviously, the river water today would be different than the river water 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they didn't actually use the water for it, but the
cows were drinking the water, weren't they?
Oh, for sure. And they were grazing on the grasslands that were. But understand where this was. This was above the Po River. Okay, and now the cows were feeding on grasslands that had a lot of minerality. Much of the minerality came down from the alpine areas, because as the snows melt from the Alps and came down and washed down and entered into the Po Valley, created extremely fertile grasslands. That's why that area was very prized, even by the Portuguese back before the Romans. And the Romans prized for that. Everybody wanted a piece.
But the Portuguese were there before the Romans?
Oh, the way I understand, the Portuguese...
Not the Etruscans?
No, the Etruscans were further south, in the areas of northern Lazio, Tuscany, and Umbria. But the Portuguese were in that area of the Po, which is in the northern part, where you find Piemonte and you find Lombardy and Veneto. And that area is extremely, extremely fertile. It's the breadbasket of Italy, where much of the milk production comes from. And so it's fantastic grazing lands. And that's why you had a lot of cheese, cow's milk cheese produced there. Further south, Tuscany and south, and Romagna south, you have sheep's milk, a lot of sheep. But further north, they had sheep 2,000 years ago, but today it's all cow's milk. Any sheep, some goats, but any sheep you find up there in Italy, of course, they use for meat. They don't even use it for milk.
Lou Palo is my guest on today's Leonard Lopate at Large.
Hey girl, I love you like I love Italian food. I do. I'm not trying to be rude to you. I just love Italian food. The only girl I compare to pasta of angel hair, a cheese stuffed ravioli is you.
And we are back with Luigi Palo, who is one of the owners of Palo's Fine Foods on the corner of Mott and Grant Streets in Little Italy, an area that has changed a lot over the years. When the store opened, I imagine that 98% of the people in the area were Italian Americans or immigrants.
Well, the neighborhood of Little Italy has always been a neighborhood of immigrants, and if you go back 200 years ago, it was really an area that was impoverished. It was what we called part of the 5 Points area. It was the area that the poorest of the poor lived there. The Irish, when they first came over, they settled in that area. The Italians continued to move into that area. Just east of that area was your Ashkenazi and Eastern Sephardic Jewish community. It was the poor area of New York City. And
then Chinatown was developed nearby.
Well, there was a very small Chinatown. The Chinese people were very discriminated against when they were back in that day. And they were only coming to America as birds of passage, meaning that they were here to work for a few years, make some money, then they had to go back. They did not have the permanent ability to stay here. And what happened was, between 1880 and 1920 was that mass migration, and then they closed the door on Italian immigrants. Little Italy was overpopulated anyway. I mean, my grandparents couldn't even find an apartment to live in that Little Italy area. So they had to move into the fusion area between the Eastern Sephardic Jewish and Ashkenazi Jewish and Italians, sort of fused together between the area of Essex Street and Forsyth Street. So they closed the door on Italians and didn't reopen it until after World War II, when Europe was devastated, the devastation of Europe. They allowed more Western Europeans to come into America again, including Italians. So Little Italy had its day, and in the 60s, when immigration laws changed, they opened the door for new waves of immigrants, Eastern Europeans, Middle Easterns, Latin Americans, and of course Asians. And because we had a small Chinatown in our area, the Asians came into the area and started to come in and move into the area of Little Italy. Now, understand something. It was a big challenge for businesses like mine, as our neighborhood was dwindling and the Chinese community was growing, to really take charge of what we are all about. And it's a curious thing that I think the strength of the Palos developed because of the neighborhood change. We were able to realize that we needed to make ourselves more of a shining jewel rather than an eyesore in a changing community. And that's what we did. And we became more in focus, believe it or not. Now, today, the neighborhood is changing again. The area is becoming gentrified. The same reason why my grandparents and great-grandparents, why the Chinese immigrants came to this country, for opportunity, to make a better life for themselves. Today we have young people from all over the United States, the new immigrants, American immigrants, coming to New York City for opportunity, and they're settling into this area. The area is becoming gentrified. It's not a bad thing. a little sad that maybe neighborhoods are starting to really become a collage of many different cultures, and you lose that sense of what an ethnic neighborhood is. But this is what it is.
A lot of things were lost. Bakeries closed. There used to be pork stores in Little Italy. They're all gone. But I find it interesting that this is an area where two of the most popular ethnic food cultures, maybe the two most popular, Chinese and Italian foods, live side by side. I don't know. Did that bring? Do you think that brought tourists into the Chinese neighborhoods or the Chinese restaurants or the Italian restaurants?
Well, certainly, the neighborhood of Little Italy, the neighborhood of Chinatown, have become tourist attractions, and it's a favorite place for people from all over to travel to and come and visit in this area. However, Di Palo's is a tourist attraction, but it's not a tourist store. We're a destination store where people actually come. A tourist is not going to come to our place to buy cheese. They're going to come to our place to take a picture. I would often say if I could get $1 for every photograph taken a day in my place, I wouldn't have to sell a pound of cheese. Oh, yeah, hundreds of pictures, which we don't mind. We actually encourage it.
But interestingly, a fair number of your customers these days are Chinese. So we're seeing a kind of a fusion of cultures as well.
But just like I'm an American with Italian heritage, many of them are Chinese, are American with Chinese heritage. And Italian food, Chinese food, Mexican food, Middle Eastern food, these are now American foods because we all enjoy the diversity of different ethnic cuisine. And it became part of the American diet. So it's not uncommon for young Chinese to come into my store and order prosciutto, mozzarella, parmigiano, and a host of many other things, and really embrace the Italian food culture.
How do you know where to go to look for unique foods when you travel to Italy?
Well, certainly I take region by region. When I travel to Italy, often I need to go and create relationships with people. I seek out. I very rarely go, believe it or not, to these food shows. If I do go, I'm doing a seminar or something like that there. I don't usually go to look for product. I try to go to seek out unique old products that to introduce to the American consumer. And that's what I've done for the last 45 years.
Although you say you write about tasting prosciutto for the first time in Italy. Wasn't prosciutto available here? Weren't you selling it at the Palo?
In 1968, there was an embargo on all pork products from Italy. There was what they called the swine flu that really didn't affect people, but they slaughtered many hogs throughout all of Italy. And we weren't able to bring in any of the Italian pork, any of the prosciutto di Parma or prosciutto San Daniele or Toscana. So when I went to Italy in 1973, 45 years ago, I learned how to eat prosciutto the proper way. And I learned from
a waiter told you.
Well, it wasn't a waiter. Believe it or not, it was another person sitting at the table next to me. When I saw he was ordering prosciutto and he had it on his plate, and then I told the waiter I wanted the same. I was with Connie, my wife, and what happened? He saw me take the fork and knife and ready to cut the prosciutto, and he waves his finger across, saying, "Oh no!" He says, "You eat prosciutto with your fingers." And he said, "When you eat prosciutto, you lift the slice up and put it across your face and smell the aroma." In this case, it was prosciutto di Parma. Smell the aroma of those rolling hills in Langhirano, and then place it in your mouth and let it almost melt in your mouth. He said, prosciutto should be treated as finger food, not with a fork and knife.
There are 400 different types of cheeses in Italy. How many types of prosciutto are there?
Well, throughout Italy, they make different styles of prosciutto. If you want to talk about who is a nocino is anybody that cures or deals with pork. Where it comes from the town of Norcia. Fortunately, it was devastated during the last earthquake. Norcia is in Umbria. and they do prosciutto there, prosciutto di noce, and we do prosciutto toscano. Prosciutto toscano is cured with juniper and black pepper and heavily salted, and they have prosciutto in San Daniele, and then we have Speck Alto Adige in the area of Südtirol. So this
Each different style.
What is prosciutto? Prosciutto is ham, and then we have cooked ham, prosciutto cotto meaning cooked, prosciutto crudo meaning cured or raw, and this is the diversity of the regions will give you their interpretation of what ham is supposed to be like, whether it's cooked or cured.
And then those 400 types of cheeses, many people swear by Parmesan Reggiano. If you, in your store, you once taught me something that I could not have known otherwise. You had 4 rounds of Parmesan. One you said was from winter, one was from the spring, one was from the summer, and one was from the fall. And the cows eat different things at different times a year.
The cycle of the cow is different. The climate is different. And, of course, what they're eating is different. For instance...
But most cheesemakers in this country don't make cheese in the wintertime.
Well, cows give milk 365 days a year. What are you going to do with all that milk? You can't drink it all and turn it into cheese. Parmigiano Reggiano is made 365 days a year. And the point is that it makes a difference in the characteristic. But not only do we have different seasons of Parmigiano Reggiano, we have different breeds of cows that we get the milk for Parmigiano Reggiano. There's the big talk of the La Vacca Rossa, the red cow, the Modenese Bianca, the white cow from Modena, and there's the Bruna, which is really a descendant of the Bruna Alpina, which is the Alpine brown cow. That each one imparts its own characteristics, the type of milk, and of course, introduced after World War II is our Holstein cow, which is called the Frison, or we call it the milk machine. Produces the most milk. Each one of those cows will give you a little different characteristic on the cheese. It makes the cheese interesting.
You mentioned earthquakes. Italy has suffered from a number of different things: invasions, foreign invaders, earthquakes, volcanoes, a devastating war, World War II. Has that
and World War I, which was extremely devastating.
Oh, yeah, but the armies all moved across northern Italy.
Right.
So Napoleon moved across northern Italy as well. Has that had an impact on food making? Do we see that reflected in how things change over the years? I ask you that because I know you know a lot about the history of Italian food.
Yes, I think one thing about the food culture of Italy has been pretty stable. It hasn't really changed. I mean, going back to the Romans invaded all over. They went to England and invaded England, but they spared the town of Cheshire. Why did they spare the town of Cheshire? They loved the cheese that was made in Cheshire. So they wouldn't destroy that town because of the cheese that was made there. So, even wars and all that, I think the food tends to remain the same.
My guest is Luigi Palo of Palo's Fine Foods. This is WBAI. I'm Leonard Lopate at Large. We're at 99.5 FM in New York. You've said your favorite cheese is Piave. That's named after a river, isn't it? Well,
yes.
The Piave River. What makes it special?
What I'm saying about it's not so much it's my favorite cheese. It's my favorite understanding of cheese. Over 30 years ago, we introduced Piave into New York, and it was the most successful new cheese I've ever presented to the consumer.
Why do you think it hadn't been brought in earlier?
Well, it's
Small
actually
quantities,
it's actually a young produced cheese. What I mean by young produced cheese, it hasn't been in production for many years, maybe 40 or 45 years. Maybe a little bit more. And what it is, the family of cheese is called Latteria. Latteria is a family of cheeses such as Montasio, Spilimbergo. These are cheeses from that particular area of the Veneto and Friuli, Venezia Giulia. And I couldn't understand this cheese was always so perfect. In all the years I've sold this cheese, I've never had one that was off. And I didn't understand. And I said, the cheesemaker here was a master. So I wasn't buying the cheese direct. I was buying it from someone who was getting it from a distributor in Italy. So finally, they came to America saying they want to bring this cheese into America, and they were shocked to see it was in my place already. So what happened? I developed a relationship with them, and I said, I'm going to come and visit you. So now I take the trip I get into Summa Campagna, which is just outside Verona, and I drive 2 hours up into the mountains of the province of Belluno, Veneto, up by the Piave River, right at the base of the Dolomite Mountains, the most beautiful mountain ranges you could ever imagine. So what happened? I go to meet the cheesemaker, and I'm ready to meet this old cheesemaker, Mastro Casaro, someone who really understands and how to make cheese so perfect. And it was the biggest disappointment in my life. What was the disappointment? The cheesemaker was a computer. It was the most updated, technological, advanced cheese-making facility I've ever seen in my life. It was one man pushing a button, the cheese stamped every 12 seconds. I said, what makes this cheese so great? And this was the enlightenment. It was the milk. The milk from this particular area, from the free grazing mountain cows, that they were able to take modern technology and ancient technique of cheese making and put the two together. But the milk is what made this cheese special. And it's not that it's my favorite cheese.
Are being made that way?
I think more and more now are becoming very automated, like everything else in this world. But to understand making a cheese automated, making a cheese by hand, you need to have the good understanding of the milk, the properties, and how to put them all together.
I can see why you were disappointed, because your book is full of stories of you talking to cow herds and sheep herders, and I'm assuming you also talk to people who grow olives around Italy, although isn't a fair amount of olive oil coming from Italy actually made from olives from North Africa and from Greece and from Spain?
Well, for sure we have olive oil in Italy. Italy is a large olive oil producer, Spain being the largest, but Italy is also a very large olive oil producer. And sometimes they need to get olives from other countries to fulfill the need and price point. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as we know it.
It affects the taste.
Of course. And there's nothing wrong with the oil from Tunisia, nothing wrong with the oil from Greece or Spain. What we need to know is where the olive oil is from. So today, there's a lot of very strict rules and a lot of things. You'll notice on a can of oil, product of Italy or packed in Italy. If it says packed in Italy, it tends to be olives mixed from olives from other countries. Nothing wrong with that. The price point is a little bit less usually. It meets the needs of certain people. The problem that we're faced with is understanding of olive oil. Why do you pay $25 for a half liter of olive oil and $25 for a 3-liter can of olive oil? There's got to be a difference. And that difference lies in not only in where the olive is from a particular farm, hand-picked, within hours pressed, and then bottled immediately to capture the freshness. The acidity level is so important, something we cannot taste. People taste very strong olive oil that gives you a little pinch in the back of your throat, we call pizzica, all right, or pepper finish. They think, it's high in acid. No, that's not true. You can't taste acidity. But the lower the acidity, the higher the quality. The higher the polyphenols, where we get our antioxidants, the better the quality. And then you might want to have one particular olive, monocultivata, single olive variety, to taste that particular olive. And certainly there's estate olive oil and there's big production.
Often, by the way, the olive trees next to wine the vineyards, grape vineyards for wine. So I guess the same kind of thinking goes into the both.
Well, for sure. The olive...
You blend some, and then some are based on one grape from one
exactly,
little area.
In wine, too. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Now, we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to touch on vinegars because there's a wide range of vinegars as well. And balsamic is not like any other vinegar. How is that made?
Well, in essence, balsamic vinegar is not really vinegar, because vinegar, you take the translation of the word, means sour wine. And balsamic vinegar, the traditionale, now we're talking, is made from the cooked must. What is must? It's the grape juice. When you squeeze the grape, you get the juice. You don't allow the sugar in the grape to ferment into alcohol to make wine, then sour the wine to make vinegar. You take the cooked juice of the grape juice, cook it, and then start the souring process immediately. And then over a period of many years, through evaporation and through complexity from changing barrels from one type of wood to another, you're going to get a unique textured and flavored soured grape must, which we call balsamic vinegar.
And must it be from Modena?
The true balsamic vinegar started by the
Modena?
I would say Modena in Italian, Modena in English, so it's both right. The true balsamic vinegar needs to be from one of two areas of two towns in Emilia-Romagna, the town of Modena and the town of Reggio Emilia. These two areas have the history that go back to the Romans producing this particular type of. And what was it used for traditionally? It was used as a health aid. The Romans realized that vinegar used to preserve meat, used to preserve vegetables. So why not drink vinegar to preserve our body? And they would drink vinegar like we drink wine today, but they developed this type of soured grape juice to help enhance their health. Today, what is a healthful item? Well, maybe for digestion, I don't know. But in any case,
I like it on my salad.
I like it too. I like it on certain types of meats. And there's all different levels of what we call aceto balsamico. We have balsamic vinegar of Modena, and we have balsamic vinegar traditionale of Modena. It's a very big difference between the two.
I was surprised to learn that the first reference to pasta was from, I think, 1,100 years ago in Sicily. Did you know that?
Actually, I didn't know that. It's something that I just learned.
1154 in Sicily. So I always thought pasta came as a result of the Marco Polo going to China and coming back with flour.
Well, perhaps the term pasta originated in Sicily, not that what we know as pasta today. Because pasta, we use the term pasta in when we're making mozzarella cheese.
Yeah.
When we're making mozzarella. It's called pasta filata. And what is pasta? Pasta is an unfinished paste. Okay?
Pasta means paste.
Basically. So it's an unfinished paste. And filata means we take that unfinished paste, recook it, and stretch it to make that. So maybe the term pasta originated in Sicily. But I'm only speculating now. I don't really know for sure.
Now, you import a whole bunch of flours from Italy. Do we need those specialized flours, the double O's and such, to make pasta correctly?
Well, truthfully, I'm not a chef or a baker. Okay, I could only be the one to supply the ingredients. But certainly, one flour type of flour, the texture, double O is a certain fine texture. Single O, one with more gluten. You might want flour from the chestnut or the chickpea to create certain different dishes. We need to supply the consumer with the various types of products so they could make the dish that they want, whether they want to make their chickpea panella. In Sicily, they need the chickpea flour, things like that.
Lou, I'm so sorry we've run out of time. That brings us to the end of our show, and my great thanks to you, Lou DiPalo from DiPalo's Fine Foods in Little Italy, to Charlie Morrow, who composed our theme music, to Reggie Johnson, who was at the audio controls, and to my assistant producer, Jesse Lint, who makes things run smoothly. Leonard Lopate at Large comes to you on Saturdays at 4 and Tuesdays at noon. You can subscribe to Leonard Lopate at Large podcast on iTunes and by clicking on Robin Hood Radio's archive program site, which is robinhoodradio.com. You can also check out Leonard Lopate at Large Facebook page. We hope to see you next week.